Hello all, my name is Chris Burnson and we're so happy to welcome you to our two-day symposium, A Sense of Place, and thank you all for coming. Tonight is the final evening of the symposium and this is our final event. In September 2019, a group of 12 graduate students from the Department of Art and Art History at Hunter College traveled to Dakar, Senegal to study with internationally renowned curator Koyo Kuo and the incredible team at Raw Material Company, a nonprofit art center offering research and residency programs for artists and curators alongside seasonal exhibitions, publications, and lectures. The focus of our time in Dakar with Koyo was how curatorial practice can make the presence of a place visible, or in her own words, how have actors active in our local contexts and from across the creative disciplines responded to and shaped their or our environment? We returned to New York with this question in mind, and in partnership with Kuo and Raw Material Company, organized a symposium of programming in response, originally scheduled for March 2020, then postponed due to global pandemic. Since that time, the question of place seems more relevant than ever. Presented now in an online format, our symposium considers gentrification and displacement, infrastructures of surveillance, and sustainability as they relate to how artists see themselves shaping and being shaped by their immediate environments. About tonight's panelists. Tourmaline is an artist, filmmaker, cultural producer, writer, and activist whose practice highlights the experiences of Black, queer, and trans communities and their capacity to impact the world. Howardena Pindell is an American painter and mixed media artist. Her work explores texture, color, structures, and the process of making art. It is often very political, addressing the intersecting issues of racism, feminism, violence, slavery, and exploitation. Ayesha Williams is Deputy Director of the Laundromat Project. Ayesha is an art professional with over a decade of experience working with visual artists, commercial galleries, and nonprofit institutions. The Laundromat Project is a resilient institution for artists and communities of color and those who understand that creativity can change the world and, most importantly, their local communities for the better. Siona Wilson is a CUNY professor and research scholar whose research probes issues of sexual difference, race, and sexuality at the intersection of art and politics in the 20th century. Author of Art, Labor, Sex Politics, Feminist Effects in the 1970s British Art and Performance in 2014, she has published on photography, experimental film, video, sound, and performance art. And she is in edited collections and journals. Tonight's event considers experiences of structural violence and systemic erasure as they relate to an individual and collective sense of belonging or sense of place. The program is inspired by the resilience of independent, community-driven creative endeavors aimed at resisting such power imbalances as we observed in the thriving artist communities we encountered in Dakar, Senegal. The conversation will reflect on Tourmaline and Pindell's films, which give unique form to a systemic power imbalance in which displaced and disenfranchised people must fight for self-determination, and on the efficacy and resilience of community networks to fight such imbalances as exemplified by the Laundromat Project's mission to grow a community of multiracial, multi-generational, and multidisciplinary artists and neighbors committed to social change. And now I'll turn it over to our moderator and our panelists.
Hi, great. Thanks so much for that introduction, Chris, and thank you for the invitation, and also thank you to the other organizers, Melania and Sydney, who we will see later in our session for the Q&A, and also the invisible Izzy, who's making the technology possible. She's been amazing. Thank you. So before I make a few very short remarks about how I understand the way that these works and these projects, these practices weave between each other, weave together. I want to first turn over to Ayesha just for a brief presentation, because we just saw films by Howardena and by Tourmaline, and I want for the whole conversation to have everybody present. So Ayesha, over to you.
Thank you. Let me get myself situated. Fantastic. And my screen can be seen. Awesome. And yeah, thank you so much to the Hunter team for the invitation to join the conversation, and definitely to Siona, Tourmaline, and Howardena. And it's such a privilege and an honor to be in conversation with each of you this evening. And I'm going to take a very few brief moments to give a little bit of background and grounding about the Laundromat project and who we are, and just to be able to leave a lot of space and room and time for conversation. And so, contrary to what our name might lend itself to folks believing, we actually do not work out of a laundromat. The original idea of the organization, which was founded by Ayesha Wilson in 2005, was that at some point we would own and operate a laundromat, which would actually be a functioning laundromat with artist space and residencies and community projects and workshops and things of that nature. But that idea did not come to fruition. And so now when we think about laundromats, we think about a laundromat as a metaphor for community space where folks come together and engage with one another. So you're doing your laundry, you're waiting for your clothes to dry, you're connecting with your neighbor directly next to you, and you all are engaging in deep conversation and discussion. And so at the LP, our mission here on the screen is that we advance artists and neighbors as change agents in their own community. And we do that by working at the intersection of art, social justice, and community building. And particularly, we build community within and amongst communities of color across New York City. We are a New York City based and centered organization. We make art and we build community together with communities to create change we want to see in the world. And that's a world where we can all show up as our full selves in all the many ways and identities that we hold. Through our artist projects and initiatives, we engage issues such as community wellness and care, which is so needed during these times, immigration, racial justice, and more. We are grounded in our organizational values, which you'll see here. And I encourage everyone to visit our website where you can see more detail, but they are very intentional values which center and ground our work, and we carry it through in everything that we do. So we nurture creativity, we are POC centered, we create change, we value place, we write our own histories, which is so important now in these times. We practice abundance, so abundance in everything and all that we do. And we are always propelled by love. And in addition, the LP is a Black-rooted organization. We were founded by a Black woman, Ayesha Wilson, and currently led by a Black American Nigerian woman, Kemi Alaisimi. And we are also POC centered. And so by specifically and intentionally naming ourselves our POC centeredness, we manifest being POC centered as an ongoing organizational value and practice that's rooted in multiracial solidarity. And these principles, which you see on the screen, represent the ways that we show up for and ask to be held to account by our community. And again, I invite you to visit our website where you can read more detail about how these principles came to be and what they each embody. And programmatically, as an organization, we work at we are driven by creative activation, and we are locally grounded. And the locally grounded place has a special significance to us now because this year, 2 weeks before COVID came about, we signed a 10-year lease on a storefront in the heart of Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn on Fulton Street. It's our first organizational home where we'll be able to house our administrative and our programmatic operations. And so we are deeply embedded now in Bed-Stuy in the storefront. And our programs manifest in our artist residencies and fellowships through our Create Change program, as well as community learning and partnerships through our intentional community engagement practices, as well as public programs. And I'm gonna skip this slide just to scan through. And so Create Change is actually our flagship program, which connects communities and artists in meaningful ways. It's our program since 2006. We fostered 165 artist leaders. We provide support to 3 to 5 artists through our year-long residency program and up to 12 creative practitioners and cultural organizers through our fellowship program. And I think it's important for me to hold space for a program that we've since transitioned from, but has embodied and been such an impact, made such an impact in the work that we do currently. And it's the work that we did through the Kelly Street Collaborative. We were literally in residence in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Hunts Point neighborhood in the South Bronx. We were at the basement. We sat directly in front of a beautiful, fantastic, amazing, nurturing community garden. And we spent 4 years just building with community, understanding what it meant to be embedded in community, understanding what it meant to connect with community, to engage with one another, to use art as a catalyst to drive and create conversations, to move conversations. And so I just want to give some space to highlight Kelly Street and how it has woven itself into the DNA and the history of the organization. And like I mentioned earlier, so our roots, we went through a strategic visioning process. And during that period of time, we understood that in order for our work to be done more deeply, we actually needed to embed ourselves and be succinctly, specifically embedded in a neighborhood where we could build with community even more intentionally than we had been before. And so through a lot of conversations, a lot of discussions, a lot of thinking, a lot of learning, we actually came full circle back to Bed-Stuy, where we were originally founded. And this here on the screen is our new home. We will be grounded in place and practice what it means to be embedded for the long term in a community. What it means to truly listen, learn, respond, adapt, and move in rhythm with community. We're excited for what's to come and what can be imagined in our new home, from special artist commissions, artist workshops, public programs, and more. And we very much look forward to learning from and building with the Bed-Stuy community. And I will wrap by with a quote, by sharing a quote from the LP's founder, Erasures Wilson, which has actually been a guiding vision and thought for me, particularly over this past year. And what Risa shares is that when living is a matter of survival, it is easy for our imagination to seem frivolous. It is easy to forget that problem solving is rooted in creativity. The fact is, our humanity rests in our ability to dream, to create, to inspire, and to be inspired. And so that's the LP. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ayesha. Okay, so so the question of space and the act of countering erasure, which is the title of our panel this evening, is animated differently in the practice of our panelists. But I think that there are important threads that connect and weave between the bodies of work. Howardena's film Free White and 21 from 1980 takes us through a series of institutional spaces and describes the personal violence, physical, social, emotional, of white patriarchy and white feminism through the family, education, business, the art world, and I imagine, but we will hear about this, the counter-institutional space of the women's movement as well. In Tourmaline's films, there's a layering of affective geographies and a process of imagining and reinscribing, countering the historical erasures of Black trans women. Space is revivified through bodies that are vulnerable, beautiful, and fiercely brave. And the Laundromat project, as we just heard, has served as another kind of counter-institution in the present and in the future, moving forward to the future. It's a home for artists of color, a training ground and mentorship program. New York needs the Laundromat project, and I'm hoping to talk to Ayesha about its future and about imagining a different kind of art world in New York after the pandemic. So ahead of time, I posed some questions to Howardena, and she's prepared a statement in answer. So I'm going to turn over to you now, Howardena. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, thank you. AIR, for those who don't know, it was called Artist in Residence. It was the first women's cooperative. It was in New York City. AIR is a counter institution within the white art world, which had, when AIR was established, clear signals that women and people of color are not allowed full entry. AIR was all white except for me. I was the token. The fact that I worked at the Modern is probably what made them more interested in having me join the group. It was the white women's version of white supremacy in an upper caste system. The art world is largely imperial as great wealth keeps it afloat. I proposed my lynching piece as a performance to the AIR membership The piece, which is now showing as a video film at the Shed until April 11th. I prefer it as a video film. Air turned it down. That's when it was a performance. I feel more people see it as a film. I assume Air was uncomfortable with issues about race as well as it being gruesome. One of the first founders of Air for years has said about me that she does not know she's Black. It would always get back to me that she was saying this. They later had one Black woman artist member of Carolyn Martin and Ana Mendieta, who was originally from Cuba. Free White in 21 as a code. For me, the blonde wig is part of the code of white supremacy. How many white women bleach their hair blonde and no one says anything? It's just a dog whistle. If a non-white woman, Black, Latina, Asian, or Native American bleaches her hair, they are mocked. It is reverse dog whistle. I have made 3 videos, one called Doubling, and has been only shown a few times. It's about war atrocities. The title comes from the work of Robert Lifton, who revealed the double consciousness of Nazis. They would go home to their families and kiss the white and pet the dog after a day of murdering and torturing the Jewish people in death camps. I made this during a video workshop at the kitchen. In terms of my work in white takes different forms. I follow where my music takes me. Oddly, I'm numb when watching Free White and 21 now. Maybe because I see a very young face and I am now 77. It seems years ago, but it is still timely. The most racism I experience has been from white women, teachers, art dealers, and bosses. There have, however, been some white women who have been very good to me. My teaching job at a SUNY campus, the state looked into their hiring practices and found that they applied for waivers to hire white women instead of non-whites. The state tried to make up for this systemic racism. One thing that's interesting is the departments that are the hardest to integrate are the art departments. They're the most resistant to change. I feel that the video is layered in a way like my abstract painting. After the accident, I made the video in 1980. I started putting text in my paintings and hoped that my message was clear. White male art critics in the 1990s went after me saying the issue-related work was, in quotes, shrill. That was in the New York Times. The tape was stolen out of one of my traveling exhibitions when it was traveling and being shown at an art school gallery in Ohio. The gallery director was threatened. They stole his camera equipment, and I received heckling calls from art students at home. Whites tried to close my show down in Atlanta because they said it was hostile to whites. I felt displacement from Black communities and went to white schools. I was usually the only one, and people did their best to keep them from having me as a friend, from demanding they never see me again, to offering money to the art department at Boston University so that there would not be a Black student in the department. They already had a quota of 1. But the parent was rich and wanted to make it a quota of none. My sculpture teacher, Lloyd Lilly, remarkably told me what was going on and told me to keep going with my talent. In the Atlanta area, a theater event, which was a positive look at homosexuality, outraged whites, and they cut off all money to the arts and gave it to the police. This was in 1990. In my abstract work, I would use glitter, and white male critic from a now defunct art magazine, New Art Examiner, said that my work was nothing but a light show and he wanted to have sex under my paintings. There are issues in some Black families where there are various skin tones and some people can pass for white. On my mother's side of the family, it was an issue. One of her sisters married a man who looked white, but he had curly, nappy hair. He killed himself in front of his daughter, who could pass for white. She was not a bottle blonde and had light eyes. She had her tubes tied so that she would not have children and married white, moving into the white community. They did not know she was Black, and she cut all ties to the family. She eventually divorced and married someone Black. Free White and 21 made almost a year after the car accident where I was a backseat. I'm sorry. Free White and 21 was made almost a year after a car accident where I was the backseat passenger. After the car accident, I started working in autobiography and issue-related work. I traveled with Lowry Sims, who was at the Metropolitan Museum in 1973, to Africa for the museum's Museum of Modern Art's Library Overseas program. We were there for 2 months. We visited Dakar. We traveled to East and West Africa. We first landed in Uganda, which amazingly, because I am somewhat recently found out that Uganda was where my mother's first ancestor was born 80,000 years ago, according to a National Geographic Genome Project. I had my DNA done by a Canadian company, and they found that I had ancestors throughout Africa, including Zulu, South Africa, Mali, Madagascar, Nigeria, Benin, Somalia, Ethiopia, Libya, but also I had Ashkenazi, Sephardim, Palestinian, Greece, Cyprus, Scandinavia, Spain, Basque, India, New Delhi, Inuit, Eskimo. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, Ireland, Germany, Portugal, Sicily, etc., Scythian and Thracian. Our primary ancestors are from Africa, whether you are in the present time Black or not. Made decisions when I was young, 12 years old, to not have children. I grew up during Jim Crow and segregation. Philadelphia had no signs of whites only, but they would stare at you with abject hatred. Our neighbors were white and shared a common fence. They did not speak to us or acknowledge us. My father loved to drive, and I can remember on long trips, all of the motel signs flipping to no vacancy when he would go in to try to get a room. I remember the rudeness of white gas stations attendants and having to cook in the woods because there was nowhere to eat. That's it.
Thanks so much. You answered everything I asked and more. And I
tried.
And I'm sorry we have such little time. I want to make sure to get to everybody. So I'm going to move on now to Tourmaline. Hi. All your films are informed really deeply by historical research. It's part of your practice as an artist, research into lives that have been forgotten, lives that have been erased, in particular Black trans women's lives have been forgotten and erased. But the films aren't historical films in the traditional sense. They don't give historical information. And in this sense, I think your work contrasts in a way with Howardena's work in this regard, but they have a constitutive relationship to history. And I want to test an idea that came up for me in a panel of this conference yesterday morning. It was inspired by something that the artist Billy Zangewa said, just sort of off the cuff. So coming back to your work, so I'm thinking about the films as being created using historical figures as a form of kind of ghost dancing, or as Billy put it yesterday morning in relation to her own creative process, as a communing with her muse, which I thought was a really beautiful idea. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the relationship between the historical research and the aesthetic work, because the aesthetic work is so, filled with layers, with color, with sound. It's if you read like an account of a Tourmaline film and then you see a Tourmaline film, there's such a kind of difference. It's a beautiful, beautiful difference. Yeah, if you could just speak a little bit about that, that would be great.
Sure, yeah. Well, I first just wanted to say, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That I actually feel really honored to be part of this conversation with artists whose work has had a huge impact, not only on my work, but on the capacity to be in this world and to be making the work. So I'm just like, I'm really eating this panel up and I'm feeling so alive right now. Specifically around the question of like history and how it engages history, I think a lot about Saidiya Hartman's essay, Venus in Two Acts, which talks about how the archive isn't this neutral place, right? And so often the remnants of, my people, of Black people in an archive will be, and this is what Steve talks about, in the transatlantic slave trade, it was a name on an insurance ledger, right? When one of the slave ships that brought us to this like colonial land went down, right? And so Saidiya talks about how it's so important to question what we know as fact when making something truthful, right? So like a factual account and a truthful account aren't the same thing. Oftentimes when we're making something factual, we're really reproducing the limits of this violent place, the archive, that never was meant to account for us in the first place. And so for me, I think it's really important. A lot of my work has been about like ancestral and elder stewardship, right? How to tell stories that feel lush and alive, that use as fuel, the conditions that were never meant to keep us alive in order to daydream and create and imagine worlds and conditions and ultimately the earth that we really truly deserve. And I do that on an aesthetic level that feels really good to me. I like to work with and have ongoing relationships with Gio Wyeth, who is an amazing musician who has scored, all of my work for these films. And, Arthur Jaffa came through and did the cinematography. And I like that kind of through line with Daughters of the Dust. There's such an important aesthetic stewardship that I feel called to as well, right? That is about, it's like back in the day, so at the height of the, Black freedom movement, which is also called the Civil Rights Movement, there were freedom schools throughout the US that were part of organizing drives. And oftentimes, Black communities would gather in freedom schools to swap out ideas that weren't working for us about, what was possible in terms of pursuing freedom for ideas that were, beneficial for us in terms of pursuing freedoms. And there were three questions that were often asked. What does the dominant culture have that we do want? What does the dominant culture have that we don't want? And what do we have already that we want to make more of? And I think to me, my work is really about, yes, we are in conditions that are horrible. And yes, we are in the midst of a mess of a thing. We know that as oppressed people so clearly and poignantly. And it's about, naming that and also looking for, well, what do we want, right? And also in the midst of this mess of a thing, what do we have already that we want to make more of? We have so often our capacity to dream, right? Our capacity to come together like tonight, to be real in the conditions and also real in the daydreams, to speak so specifically about what has been erased and elevate the kind of imagination and possibility of what we know to be true, even if it's not reflected outside of this digital room. So to me, that's like often in my work, it's really pursuing that third question of, what do we have already that we want to make more of? And doing it often through a lens of ancestral stewardship and, aesthetic stewardship.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Thanks. So your shirt you're wearing right now is a gallery you have a show in. So I think this is also good for people to know. There's a show right now at Chapter New York. Maybe someone can drop it into the chat for us to see. And I also wanted to congratulate you on the success last year, having Salacia collected by MoMA, and ask a question about this. But first off, congratulations, yeah, that's a beautiful
Very
thing
nice.
to happen in the midst of all this pain and death. So I wondered a little bit what the experience was like, you know. It's been an interesting year. MoMA has changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
in the last few years, I'm kind of hopeful about their rehang. I think there's some exciting aspects of what they're trying to do with the collection and with the direction of their collecting. So, but you know, I'm a little bit also waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe Howardena, later you can bring in your own experience on this as well. Yeah. So I wondered, Tourmaline, what that was like, and I also read something in preparation for this discussion, an interview with you, and you talked, something came out at me. You talked about the idea of dealing with the extraction of Black life. This idea of, and I wondered, you know, now you have, you know, been collected by an institution like MoMA, is this something that you are thinking about as well? And, you know, just to, you know, what has it been like, the good and the bad?
Yeah, well, I first just want to say, you know, the acquisition of Salacia in a very concrete way would not have happened without the work of everyone that came before me who challenged institutions and the conditions that they were reproducing that made life incredibly hard to be living for so many of us. You know, it is so entangled and part of all of that rich legacy, right? And it's not without that. You know, it's actively the possibility of that is born out of, you know, the work of Howardena, is born out of the work of the Laundromat project. It, you know, it's not separate from from that, you know, and so just, you know, that to me is really what is always going through my mind. I edited an anthology with the new museum. It's called Trapdoor. It's about extraction of, you know, trans communities, you know, particularly, you know, trans communities of color, and low-income communities, and communities who are disabled. And it all comes from, you know, before I was like seen as an artist, I was a community organizer. So I was doing that for a very long time before, in making art with community. The first film that I ever did was called Taking Freedom Home. It was made with the Welfare Warriors. This was back in, like, we started in 2007. We were really inspired by the Laundromat project. You know, I remember this moment. We were, you know, going back and forth to the US Social Forum. You know, it was a moment in time when we were seeing that and feeling how powerful it is to be represented in art to each other. You know, forget having an audience outside of us. It is just so beautiful when we can be with each other in that kind of creative process. So to me, also with the MoMA acquisition, it felt like, you know, this is a moment to kind of return to what I feel called to in art, which is being with each other, which is creating space for each other, which is being playful, you know, and reflecting back the real importance, the deep importance and the value of one another through art and our creative process.
Okay, cool. Howardena, do you want to add anything to that on your experience?
Well, the modern was quite different. I mean, I started in '67. I stayed there for 12 years and I was curatorial. And it was very racist. Mm-hmm. When I first applied for a job there, the head of personnel was Asian. There was a Native American curator of architecture and design. There was a very good educational program, but thanks for Ann Timpkin, everything has changed. It was so corporate when I started. At first, it wasn't as corporate. The director was hit by a car and died, and then the whole thing corporatized. They got rid of the Asian personnel person. They got rid of the curator and the Native American curator in architecture and design, and it became corporately bound. And we ended up rebelling, all of us, and we started a union. So I've been out on the street, picketing, and I was part of the group that started the union. But Ann Timpkin, I'm like stunned by what she's done, because she's integrated the galleries. They did a sort of a podcast with me where no holds were barred. I could tell them exactly what I went through. And so I'm very impressed and hopeful that she doesn't get COVID, that she's safe, because she is really behind the change that's happened, where she has literally integrated the collection. Faith Ringgold was hung in the same room as Picasso.
It's amazing.
Mel Edwards and Jackie Windsor are in the same room. I mean, these were artists I remember in the old days, I'll put it that way. Romare Bearden was in the collection, but he was hung in the hallway. In other words, the collection was in the whole collection area, but then he was part of the collection, but he would be hung in the hallway outside. So there were a lot of just implications that, and they were mostly white and male, is that artists are only white and male. Just one more thing, I was part of the acquisitions committee. I wasn't the one who made the decisions, what went into the committee, but I remember I got a call. I was acting director of the department when my director was, when she was traveling. And I remember getting a call from a white woman art dealer, and she wanted to know if her artist had been purchased. I said, no, and I'm sorry. She said, well, who was purchased? And I mentioned an African-American artist, and she started almost yelling at me, N-word, N-word. All the museum wants are N-word. So, I mean, you would run into these extraordinary, things, to the point where you go to the bathroom and the white women want to hold their purses. They're afraid of you. I left, I left because I had it, and started teaching, which has its own problems. But
No.
I'll stop there. It has its own problems, but I've been teaching for 42 years, and the student body has become more integrated, which is a great relief. Not as many Black students, more Asian students, but now we're starting to see Latino students. I think in one class I had 3 Black students, but years ago I remember in a beginning class, and there was a young Black man in the class. The white guys would walk in with this sense of entitlement, and I could tell from the young Black male student that he was afraid of them. And the white women, the young white students, would actually act like, you don't have anything to teach me. And then I had a white South African in one class, because I'd been in a car accident. I couldn't stand a long time. And so when I would sit down, she would say with great hostility, why aren't you standing? What are you sitting for? So you would run into all this hostility. It's much better now.
Yeah.
It's much better now. But anyway.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, Mama, keep up the good work.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank God, Oh.
All right, so I'm gonna bring Ayesha in, and just before, I also want to remind people, we're being reminded in the chat that if you have a question, please, could you please type it into the Q&A. So the Q&A is at the bottom of the toolbar, toward the right, and the questions will be read out by Sydney, and she's going to collate them, ones that are similar. Okay, so I'm like trying to keep us on time. We have just a little over 5 minutes. So I wanted to begin, I posed to ask Howardena to talk about her experience at AIR, or Air Gallery, as an important historical first, within the art world, as first artist-run all-women gallery. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what some of the historical models were for the Laundromat project. Are these historical models, are they, do you think of spaces from New York like Fashion Moda, maybe See No Rio, Collab, or elsewhere. I was also thinking of the Los Angeles Poverty Department, which is a super interesting project in LA. Or in other parts of the world, you know, what do you look to for the Laundromat project?
Yeah, all of those and more. And even more pointedly, kind of focusing on or pointing to this symposium, Linda Good Bryant, and the hybrid, whether it be just above Midtown, which was literally creating space,
Right. Yeah.
self-determining the spaces where Black artists wanted to show and be shown and show with one another. And then even, you know, the transition more recently, Project Eats. So I would definitely add her name to the mix in all the many ways that she shows up in all the different spaces. And you know, I think at LP, when we think about legacy, which drives everything that we do, it's all the things and. So it's art spaces, it's, you know, the Black Power, Black Panther movement, it's the Young Lords, it's the, you know, highly political folks who are going in and building community and centering love with their actions and everything that they do, as well as the more traditional kind of art spaces or art for art's sake spaces. So we always make it intentional to dig deep into the history of all the many parts that we are as an organization and how we show up, and what that hybridity looks like, and what we produce and what we put out and how we show up in the world and in the space. You think about legacy and history, even so much so that we figured out that Fulton Street is actually Harriet Tubman Way, Harriet Tubman Avenue. So, you know, what would it look like to write 1476 Harriet Tubman Way or Harriet Tubman Avenue, and carrying that legacy and that history, and understanding how that embeds in our programs, embeds in how we talk about our organization, embeds in how we engage with community and with one another. So yes.
Cool, thanks. So I want to, so this will be the last question before we move to the Q&A, and I so maybe everybody can think about it, but I want to pose it especially to Ayesha. So we, you know, this has been a really tough year, 2020, but 2020 is over. I think 2021 is going to be a tough year as well. Despite the changes that are going to happen next week, and, you know, but it's January, and I always have this feeling in January of the new year. I always have a feeling of hope, and so I'm holding on to my hope. So, you know, New York has seen a terrible loss, but New York has seen an incredible coming together and a kind of grassroots uprising, a kind of, you know, a kind of a showing of political conviction. And an imagining of a new kind of world. And there have been conversations that have been reverberating in, you know, the art world, in public spaces, in the universities, you know, in the classrooms. It's been, you know, in the, and the workplaces, other workplaces, I'm sure it's been a really incredible shift, I think, to a kind of discussion about social justice and equity. So it's kind of a double-edged thing. So I think we're in a kind of, we also are at a genuine turning point, and there's so much hope. And so I wanted first to check in with you about where you are, Ayesha, on the sliding scale with pessimism/realism on one end, and, you know, optimism and kind of thinking futurity on the other end, how you're feeling, especially with the project moving into a new phase.
Personally, or as LP? I guess that's almost like one and the same.
Either way, both.
Yeah, I'll carry one and the same. I am, and I would say the LP are living in abundance. And so I think what we realize, and what this, you know, year really put a spotlight on, is that the system doesn't work as it was constructed or designed. And as the system is literally crumbling around us, we now have the ability to really forge forward and create the spaces in the world and realize the visions that we have for ourselves, for our communities, for one another. This is literally like playing ground. Let's build it from ground up. I've been extremely inspired by collectivity of folks really just kind of coming together and coalescing around one another and really, driven by this idea of we have this opportunity to create new visions and really realize those dreams. So whether it's LP and what we're doing and moving into the space in bedside, which has been a saving grace, I think for me personally, has helped give me something to hope for, and hopefully it's offered something for our community to hope for as well, that we have been intentional about realizing this. Pandemic will not stop us. This is a dream. And again, living in abundance, it will happen. It will manifest. There is no alternative option. I think when I think about institution building and I think about, this idea, whether, this idea about thinking deficit based, but what does it look like to live in an asset based space? What does it look like to live in a space where, anything is possible with the love and the drive of community? And so I would say that's where we're at. I'm inspired by seeing new institutions being built. There's the Black School with Joseph Collier and Shawnee Peters, which if someone has a chance can drop the link to the Black School, but literally creating a schoolhouse in New Orleans in the middle of a pandemic, which uses art history and art education as a way to build community, Black community, what does it look like to center Black radical thought and vision in order to nurture generations of folks to come, literally building institutions in the middle of a pandemic. So I would say we're in a space of inspiration and abundance.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I feel like, as people have been leaving the city and corporations have been leaving the city, it's possible that, New York can become livable again. It's possible, but I want to turn over now, since we're over our 45-minute limit. Sydney, do you want to take over? I will mute myself.
Yes, thank you. And thank you all for this great conversation. We have our first question from Sarah McCaffrey, who actually helped work on this project as well. She says, thank you, Tourmaline, for offering that what we have now is the capacity to dream and the capacity to come together. How do we deepen these capacities? What are your visions for these capacities?
Is the question to me or is it to everybody?
I believe that question is directed towards everybody, or everybody can jump on that question. Yeah.
I guess I would say, little by little, like we're doing it already. I think part of my abundance practice is noticing and speaking about how we're already engaged in something, right? We're already in a deepening practice. This evening is evident of that, I have other thoughts, but I just wanted to start off with that.
Ayesha or Howardena, do you want to add on to that? Or Tourmaline, did you want to go into a little bit further? We have a little bit of time, so.
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, I think I keep coming back to those 3 Freedom School questions for a reason. So tonight is today is a new moon for people who follow what the moon's doing. It's a moment of renewal, right? And it's in Capricorn. So a new moon is when the sun and the moon are together, right? And a full moon is when they're, opposed. And so to me, Capricorn is the sign that rules making thoughts to things, right? Being the realizer of our dreams and making that tangible and concretizing it and, displaying it really prominently. So for me, I think a lot about, in a moment of a new moon, a moment of replenishment and a moment of renewal, well, what are the things that I'm turning into, material, realizations that are stemming from freedom dreaming or from those freedom schools questions. And part of it is the standard of going slow, right? Being easy about it and going slow with it, knowing that the slower I go, whether it's like thinking through a really important question, kind of like this one, or with my, artistic or creative practice, the slower I go, the more of me that I bring. And so I would say like, going slow is a way of deepening, right? Capricorn is also about the long, slow ascent to the top of the mountain. And to me, anytime that I kind of let myself not move from a place of urgency, but from a place of, oh, I'm figuring it out. I don't have to figure it out all tonight, but I'm getting there little by little. I can go to sleep, I can take a nap, I can daydream about this, I can call a friend, I can ask questions. And when I get to that place of like, oh, I don't have to have all the answers, I can ask questions. The questions so often are bringing about collectively the answer. Then I'm like, oh, I'm really figuring it out, and we're figuring it out together. So I think that to me is part of the deepening. It starts with this really perfect question that was asked. How do we deepen what's happening already? And yeah, I would say like we're going slow about it. We're being playful about it. We're daydreaming about it, and we're getting there. We're on our ascent.
And
Thank
I
you.
would add to that, just on top of that too, honoring rest and replenishment as core and essential, something I'm learning in real time and undoing the way of being before, and understanding how essential and how vital it is.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, rest has been something that it's been a wild past year, but rest is something that we definitely have been able to reacquaint ourselves with, I hope. So so we don't have like any more questions so far. So please, there's a few more minutes. Please drop questions in the chat if you have not yet. And I actually have a question that I can pop in. This is in regards it touches kind of everything this conversation has been about in regards to the struggles of like, marginalized folks in the art world. And Howardena, you said something earlier about like art departments being the hardest to integrate. And I'm just curious if like you and like everyone can kind of just speak to why that is. Like, I know like patronage, art, there's a relationship there, but I was just wondering if you all could speak to that. Yeah.
I think it's complicated. I can't figure it out because you would think the arts was a far more liberal institution, I'll put it that way. But I mean, some of the things that I've seen within my own department, it just makes me feel discouraged. Part of it is that the white male artists, when I joined the department, they were the ones in charge. And now we're sort of 50-50 in terms of men and women. But there's like an attitude that's, I don't know, the younger grad students seem to have changed. But there was before that kind of a really weird attitude about having a wide spectrum of points of view and work. The woman I spoke to had been in a number of diversity departments, and she's the one that told me that when she, went from one university to another, it was always the art departments, the visual art departments that did not want change. And the fact that when my show was in an art school, I think it was Cleveland Institute of the Arts, and the resistance was outrageous, just outrageous. In fact, the people in Atlanta who wanted my show shut down were not as aggressive as this particular art school. So that would be in the 1990s. Things have changed now, but I think a lot of it happened when George Floyd was killed. That suddenly you saw a whole new complexion coming to, a movement for people of color and for all people. Like he was the like the key that unlocked something in people's consciousness, and that suddenly you were seeing more interest in diversity, more interest in not putting up with the old system. And I'm hoping that that touches the art world as well. I'm hoping it does. But I'm finding that most of the outspoken work is by artists of color. Not the white artists, maybe the white feminists, maybe they'll do something. But it seems that the real voice in the arts is coming through African American artists, and mainly women African American artists. But there's a platform now. Ever since George Floyd was murdered, it's like something happened that changed the consciousness. And hopefully when the person who shouldn't be in office is gone, that there will be like a big breath of fresh air. And we have a diverse cabinet, whatever, that things will change for the better. And I hope that artists are touched by that change as well.
Thank you. So we have a few more minutes and a few more questions are coming in. So let's see. So the next question, and I think that this might end up being our last question just because we have a few minutes. All of the panelists tonight are so inspiring. What's a word of advice that we can take with us tonight?
Don't give up. Do not give up.
I don't know if I have a word of advice, but something I'm carrying with me. Toni Morrison, and in her essay, The Future of Time, she says there are acres of Eden inside of us, and just that vision is driving me and moving me, just to understand what that looks like and to be able to envision what that looks like and to do the work to arrive there. So it's not a word of advice, but maybe something to hold.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a word. I guess it's like, we deserve to feel good. We deserve to be fully alive and luxuriate in the lushness of our aliveness. And we're figuring out how to do it, and it's happening. So this is Jean. Jean wanted to say hi.
Oh, I love gray cats. Oh.
Really quick, actually, because you just brought up luxury, Tourmaline. There is another question about how do you do that? How do you incorporate luxury into your life and into your artistic practice?
Jean muted me. So I think we touched on it. I think that to me it's taking uppercase L luxury and making it lowercase l. It's like, what are the daily? What's the daily way that we can luxuriate? Miss Major, who's a Black trans elder who was in Stonewall, talks about how luxurious it is to just relax with a cool drink of water. What are the things that we can really, in an exaggerated way, milk the appreciation of, whether it's a cool drink of water or, making art with a friend or using a fun new camera. It can be all the things, all the brushes that make up the rich tapestry of what we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Siona, for moderating. Thank you, everybody, for participating. I'm going to hand over the mic to Chris, who's going to lead us out tonight.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you all so much for coming. Yeah, this is the last event of our symposium, A Sense of Place, and we're so happy that you've been able to come here and share it with us. At the start of this new year, we hope that the last year we've spent in place, rooted at home and in more in need of local and global solidarity than ever, will stay with us all in some ways. We hope that these conversations and perspectives that they've brought will stay with us as well. Before we go for the last time, we'd like to thank all who participated in our panels, discussions, screenings, studio conversations, and tours. And of course, we'd like to express our deep gratitude to the incredible team at Raw Material Company, Marie-Helene Pereira, Dulcie Abrams Altus, and Devin Hentz, with special thanks to Koyo Kuo for her guidance. All recordings and materials will be available online soon at the Hunter Department of Art and Art History website, which I'll throw in the chat in a moment. We thank you again for coming out tonight, and we hope you all have a good night.